Everyone on the block saw the red sticker slapped on his smoker. Bright, ugly, impossible to ignore. The cops didn't touch him. They didn't need to. That sticker did all the damage. It declared him guilty before he could even speak. And across the street, the HOA president, Karen Blackwell, stood with pruning shears in hand, smiling like a queen who'd just conquered new territory. But the truth was still burning inside the pit. David Garrett was not the kind of man who broke rules. He was a chef, a craftsman, someone who believed that heat, smoke, and time could turn meat into something holy. He wasn't running some back alley side hustle. He'd filed the paperwork. Every permit was current. His logs, perfect. His smoker, a 1,500-pound welded steel monster he called the Beast, was legal, safe, and more sanitary than half the restaurants. Downtown. He didn't see himself as a rule breaker. He saw himself as an artist. But Karen never saw art. She saw smoke, and she hated it. Silverstone Gardens was her kingdom, and Karen ruled it with an iron clipboard. A blade of grass too long, a fine, a flower bed the wrong color, a warning. And now David's barbecue, his life's pride, was her newest target. He had felt it coming. The stares, the whispers, the thinly veiled complaints about community standards. But he never imagined she would stoop so low. Not until that Friday before Labor Day weekend, his Super Bowl. The Beast had been going since dawn, coals glowing red, fat sizzling, briskets climbing slowly toward perfection. The smell wasn't just food. It was family, tradition, celebration. Neighbors ordered weeks in advance. 300 pounds of meat smoked low and slow, wrapped, resting. Every probe calibrated. Every surface sanitized. He ran his backyard like an operating room. And just as the brisket hit 203 degrees, the sweet spot where collagen melts into butter, he saw it. A white county van. 2 officials. Patrol cars rolling. In behind. Officers stepping out with hands on their belts. David's stomach dropped. Standing on her immaculate lawn, Karen Blackwell didn't even bother to hide her grin. The health inspector Doyle was first to speak. David had always thought him fair, by the book, not a man to make a scene. But this morning, Doyle avoided his eyes. "We've had a complaint," he said. 2, actually. Next to him, Captain Ruiz, the fire marshal, folded his arms, grim-faced. Food. Poisoning. That was the charge. The words hit David like a blade. His craft, his process, everything he stood for, reduced to a lie. He knew it instantly. Karen's lie. She had turned his art into poison in the eyes of the law. "That's impossible," he said, voice low, steady, burning. "Every piece of meat is logged, cooked through, held at temperature. My process is flawless." But procedure didn't care about passion. 2 complaints meant one outcome: shutdown. David watched in silence as Doyle pulled a large red sticker from his folder. It looked like something meant for condemned buildings, not a man's backyard smoker. But Doyle slapped it across the Beast's steel door all the same, closed by order of the county health department. The sound of it sticking was louder than the pop of grease hitting coals, louder than the officer's boots shifting in the grass, louder than Karen's phone camera clicking from across the street. David wanted to scream, wanted to tear it off. But instead, he logged the temperature, shut the firebox, and bit down on his fury. His yard, his sanctuary, had just been branded a crime scene. Neighbors started gathering, some whispering support, others shaking their heads, their noses twitching at the smoke like it was proof of guilt. David stood there, apron still on, hands trembling against the pit. He didn't cry, he didn't shout, he didn't give Karen the satisfaction, because chefs know one truth: control your environment. And in that moment, rage became something sharper, resolve. He would fight, not with fists, not with fire, with process, with evidence, with truth. Inside his house, David turned his dining table into a war room. Permits laid out edge to edge. His binder, the Beast Operations Bible, open to every tab. Logs printed in graphs as beautiful as any painting, curves rising, stalling, breaking through, proof that no pathogen could survive his precision. Even footage from his porch camera, him in gloves, wiping down stainless steel, changing boards, working like a surgeon. He set it all out for Doyle and Ruiz when they returned. He explained the logs, the temperatures, the science. Doyle nodded. Ruiz admitted the smoker was safe. The extinguisher tagged the setup textbook. David saw flickers of respect in their eyes. For a second, hope returned. "So you'll take the sticker off?" he asked. Doyle sighed. That sound told David everything before the words even came. "I can't. The rules," Doyle explained, "were absolute. 2 notarized complaints carried more weight than proof. Until the food itself was tested, the shutdown stood. David's chest went hollow. Guilt until proven innocent. A system built not to protect truth, but to strangle it. And across the street, Roger Blackwell, Karen's meek husband, hurried by with his dog. Eyes down, guilt written all over his face. He knew. He was part of it, and he couldn't even look David in the eye. That night, the story hit the news. A clean-cut reporter on his lawn, the red sticker front and center. The Chiron. Unlicensed food business shut down. The lie was broadcast citywide. Karen didn't just silence him. She smeared him. By the next morning, David Garrett wasn't a neighbor anymore. He wasn't the chef who made their weekends better. He was the man accused of poisoning Silverstone Gardens. But he wasn't beaten. Not yet. Because the first rule of barbecue and the first rule of life is patience. Smoke takes time. Truth takes longer. And David had both. The phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Every ping was another dagger. The neighborhood text chain, once filled with garage sales and lost cat alerts, had turned into a courtroom without walls. Some messages gave him hope. "We know you're clean. David, don't let them do this. Your brisket's the best." But others cut deeper. "I always wondered if it was safe. Too much smoke anyway. Thank goodness the HOA is protecting us." It was like watching his reputation dissolve in real time. His neighbors, people he'd shared beers and birthdays with, splitting into factions. By evening, the divide felt permanent, and then Karen struck her kill shot. At exactly 7:15 p.m., an email landed in every resident's inbox. The subject line read, "Urgent, public health and safety warning." The words inside never mentioned David by name, but they didn't have to. She'd crafted it with surgical precision. It spoke of unregulated enterprises, of disturbing illness reports, of the HOA's duty to protect property values and families. It was character assassination disguised as concern, and it worked. The email didn't just accuse him. It gave every neighbor permission to treat him like a threat. David sat in the dark, phone glowing in his hand, rage simmering into something colder, sharper. He wasn't dealing with noise complaints anymore. This wasn't about smoke or permits. It was war, and if Karen wanted war, she'd picked the wrong man. He grabbed his keys. There was only one person who could help. Patricia Alvarez, a defense attorney with a reputation for tearing holes through lies until they bled truth. She was also his most loyal customer, and something more complicated. They'd had history. Never simple, never dull. But respect had always been the foundation. Respect and brisket. He found her exactly where he hoped he would, in the quiet corner of a dim downtown bar, a glass of bourbon already in her hand. She looked up at him like she'd been expecting this moment all along. "Tell me," she said simply, so he told her everything. The shutdown, the sticker, the news report, the email, the neighbor's betrayal. She listened, silent, her eyes locked on him. When he finished, she swirled the bourbon, took a slow sip, then slid the glass to the middle of the table. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm. Dangerous. "She's good," Patricia murmured. "Karen didn't just come at you with a complaint. She wrote a story. And in her story, you're the villain." She leaned in, her dark eyes burning. "This is a smear campaign, David, textbook. And she thinks you're just a guy with a smoker, but she's wrong. You're a chef. And chefs live on process, evidence, heat." A smile curved her lips, sharp and deliberate. "We're going to cook her." The next morning, Patricia brought him into her office. It wasn't lined with books like most lawyers' dens. No, her office was a war room. One entire wall was a gleaming magnetic whiteboard. Most lawyers use timelines, she said, tossing him a marker. We're going to build a menu, the anatomy of her crime, appetizer to dessert. David hadn't felt this alive in days. He uncapped the marker. This was his language. Mise en place, everything in its place. They started with the date of the alleged poisoning. He listed every customer from that day, every transaction pulled from his credit card logs. Patricia pinned their names onto the board. Then came the evidence. His temperature graphs, his food warmer logs, receipts for gloves, sanitizer, butcher paper, oak and hickory wood, security footage of him working like a surgeon, clean and meticulous. Piece by piece, he stacked the truth like bricks in a fortress. Patricia stepped back, admiring it. Your side's airtight, stronger than half the restaurants I defend. Now let's look at theirs. She wrote 2 names in red. John Smith. Jane Doe. The aliases for the 2 complainants. The victims. Ghosts for now, but soon to be flesh and blood. These are our villains, Patricia said, tapping the board. We need to know everything about them. Where they went, what they ate, who they talked to. The official investigation will take weeks. We don't have weeks. We need our own proof. Fast. David felt a surge of something he hadn't felt since the shutdown. Control. When he cooked for someone, it was a sacred promise. And Karen had turned that promise into a weapon. But promises cut both ways. And David documented everything. He told Patricia something that made her grin like a wolf. I vacuum-sealed samples of everything I served that day. Brisket, pork, ribs, sausage, all frozen, labeled. Chef, she whispered, eyes gleaming. You just gave us the smoking gun. She called in a private lab, expensive, but worth it. Within hours, a courier left with David's samples packed in dry ice. 2 days later, Patricia's voice came through the phone. Are you sitting? Down? David's chest was tight. Negative across the board. No E. coli, no salmonella, no listeria. Nothing. The lab director called your process bacteriologically perfect. Said he's never seen scores this clean outside a sterile canning facility. David closed his eyes. Relief washed through him, pure and overwhelming. He was innocent. The science had proved it. And yet, as Patricia reminded him, the war wasn't over, because the HOA wasn't fighting with science. They were fighting with fear. And Karen wasn't done. Not even close. By the time the county lab called, David already knew the results. But hearing it still made his chest tighten. Mr. Garrett, Doyle said, his voice carrying something that almost sounded like relief. Your food is 100% cleared. In fact, the cleanest sample we've tested this year. The words should have felt like victory. Instead, they tasted hollow, because Doyle wasn't finished. But the complaints are still on file. Until they're formally withdrawn, the order technically stands. I'm sorry, David. My hands are tied. So that was it. Innocent on paper. Condemned in reality. A man cleared of a crime who still lived under the shadow of it. That night, the local news ran a follow-up. Not local chef vindicated. Not HOA president falsely accused neighbor. No. The headline, Mystery Illness Baffles Officials. And who appeared on camera with perfect hair and crocodile sincerity? Karen Blackwell. We're relieved the food wasn't the cause, she said, lips curving in a mask of concern. But this highlights the danger of unregulated businesses. We must remain vigilant. David's hand clenched into a fist. She had twisted his victory into fuel for her campaign. Even his innocence had become her weapon. Patricia didn't mince words when she called that night. She's not playing defense anymore. She's escalating. David, this isn't about food. It's about power. Now we prove she's a criminal. And the hunt began. Through the subpoena Patricia filed with her civil suit, the names of the 2 anonymous complainants were finally revealed. Mark Renshaw and Susan Miller. 2 residents from just blocks away. Patricia wasted no time. We build their timeline, she said, already writing their names in thick red marker on the whiteboard. We know where you were, what you served, how you served it. Now we find out where they were, and what they ate. She drafted a letter to half a dozen neighbors around the suspects' homes, politely requesting doorbell and security footage. Most would ignore it, Patricia warned. But sometimes you get a neighbor who hates the HOA president more than they value their privacy. That neighbor's name was Eli. Eli was a retired software engineer with a camera setup that looked like it belonged at NORAD. 8 high-definition lenses covering every inch of his property, plus half the street beyond. He loathed Karen after she'd fined him for a garden gnome. When Patricia explained why they needed the footage, Eli didn't hesitate. "Take it all," he said. Hours of reviewing grainy, silent video nearly put David to sleep. Car after car, dog walkers, bicycles, nothing. Until 10:14 p.m. on the night in question, a white SUV pulled up. David recognized it instantly. Karen's. From the passenger seat stepped Mark Renshaw. Karen leaned over, her platinum hair glowing under the streetlight, and passed him something through the window. Thick, white, business-sized. An envelope. Cash. Mark nodded once, tucked it into his jacket, and disappeared into the night. David's pulse hammered. There it was, the payoff. Patricia's voice was cool, precise. 1 down, 1 to go. The next footage came from across the street from Susan Miller's home, a wide shot of the strip mall parking lot. At 8:32 p.m., just 1 hour after she supposedly ate David's barbecue, Susan's car pulled in. She walked out of a sushi restaurant carrying a takeout bag. Patricia raised an eyebrow. Food poisoning from smoked pork? Funny, considering she was eating raw fish an hour later. The evidence deepened. Patricia's investigator, Mac, combed the sushi restaurant's trash that night. He found it. A credit card slip, damp and smudged but legible. Susan Miller. Date. Time. And the order. 3 rolls. All raw. David stared at the receipt, bile rising in his throat. His name had been dragged through the mud, his reputation nearly destroyed. And all the while, she'd been eating sushi. Patricia pinned the evidence onto the board. The envelope still, the sushi receipt, the credit card slip. Piece by piece, Karen's conspiracy came into focus. She didn't just frame you, Patricia said, her eyes sharp as knives. She engineered it, she funded it, she paid for lies, and she thought no one would catch her. David's voice was low, trembling not with fear but with fury. She built a story about poison, and she thought, I'd just choke on it. He stepped back, staring at the wall of evidence. On one side, his meticulous graphs, logs, permits, footage, the clean truth. On the other, the dirty smear, the envelope, the sushi. It was more than a fight over barbecue now. It was a war over character, over trust, over the very idea of justice. Patricia's smile was cold, merciless. Tomorrow, she said, we file for an emergency injunction. It's time to stop playing defense. And David knew, deep in his bones, the fight was about to leave the backyard. It was headed to court. The courthouse smelled of old paper and stale coffee. It was nothing like David's backyard. No warmth, no smoke, no laughter, just cold fluorescent lights and beige walls that seemed designed to crush the spirit. He sat stiffly in a suit that felt 2 sizes too tight next to Patricia, who looked calm, collected, and terrifyingly focused. Across the aisle sat Karen Blackwell, wrapped in a navy blazer-like armor, her lawyer a silver-haired mannequin who looked like he'd been built in a lab to defend HOAs. Karen refused to look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the judge's bench, her chin tilted high as though she were still presiding over her manicured little kingdom. But in here, her clipboard meant nothing. In here, the rules weren't hers. The judge was Maria Santos, a woman known in legal circles for 2 things: razor-sharp patience and 0 tolerance for nonsense. Patricia had warned him. Judge Santos was tough, but she was fair. All she cares about are the facts, Patricia said. That's all we need. The hearing wasn't about winning the war. Not yet. This was about stopping the bleeding. Patricia wanted the shutdown order lifted, at least temporarily. When her turn came, Patricia rose slowly, her voice steady and respectful. Your Honor, My client's business has been closed for more than a week based on 2 complaints. We now have definitive scientific evidence from 2 separate labs, including the county's own, that his food was not only safe, but exemplary. There is no longer any public health basis for this shutdown. Every day it continues. Irreparable harm is done to his livelihood and reputation. Her words were crisp, measured, like a scalpel slicing clean through flesh. Karen's lawyer stood, smoothing his tie. Your Honor, the investigation is ongoing. While the food may have tested clean, that does not explain why 2 residents became ill. The HOA supports the county's caution in protecting the health of our community. He said it with the kind of polished ease that could make a lie sound like common sense. Judge Santos leaned forward, peering at him over her glasses. Counselor, do you have any evidence at all, beyond 2 uncorroborated statements, that this man's food was the cause? The lawyer blinked, flustered. Well, no, Your Honor, but... She cut him off like a blade. Then I have a problem. Because on one hand, I see scientific fact, and on the other, I see nothing. The courtroom went still. Patricia's hand tapped once against the table, a private signal to David. We've got her attention. After a long pause, the judge spoke. The court grants a partial injunction. Mr. Garrett may resume operations on a limited provisional basis. Pre-orders and prepayments only. No walk-ups. The shutdown order is stayed pending final investigation. David exhaled, the tension flooding out of him like smoke from a pit. It wasn't a full victory, but it was a lifeline. The beast could breathe again. Later that evening, he climbed a step stool in his garage and peeled the red sticker from the smoker's steel door. The glue left a sticky scar, ugly and stubborn, but he didn't care. The beast was alive. He hung a banner across his garage, still open by court order. And then, like clockwork, Karen struck back. An email hit the neighborhood. Important update on Silverstone legal matters. She spun the judge's ruling as a dangerous loophole, claiming the HOA's primary concerns were no longer food safety, but traffic, zoning, and the preservation of neighborhood character. She wasn't conceding. She was pivoting. 20 minutes later, her headlights lined David's curb. She wasn't alone. Cones, clipboards, even a bullhorn. She called it a safety walk. David stepped outside as neighbors gathered, curious and restless. He read the injunction line by line from his phone, voice steady, while Karen screeched about bait signage and violations. Eli, the tech neighbor with the cameras, showed up with his phone rolling, grinning like a man watching justice cook low and slow. Even the local butcher came out, apron still on, arms crossed. A patrol car crept by. The officer didn't stop. He just gave David the smallest nod, a warning to keep calm, to let Karen hang herself. Karen tried to rally the crowd with her bullhorn. It squealed in feedback, her voice shrill and hollow. David just stood there, steady as stone, handing copies of his permits to anyone who asked. Pre-orders only, no walk-ups. This is what compliance looks like. The crowd thinned, bored when no drama caught fire. Karen gathered her cones with shaking hands, spitting a final hiss. We'll elevate this, and elevate she did. The next morning, she was back, power suit glowing white in the sun, platinum hair like a battle flag, Roger trailing behind her like a ghost. She jabbed a sealed HOA letter at him. Close this now, she snapped, or our council files a civil suit. Zoning, nuisance, damages. You will not turn this neighborhood into a food court. David didn't flinch. He rubbed salt and pepper into a pork shoulder, eyes blank, calm as a surgeon. He let her spit her venom, let her think she was still in control, because he knew what she didn't. They had the envelope, they had the sushi receipt, and soon they'd have her. Discovery in a lawsuit is like gutting a fish. It's messy, it smells bad. But if you're patient enough, you find out exactly what's inside. Patricia's lawsuit against the HOA and Karen Blackwell wasn't just about defamation anymore. She'd added tortious interference, civil conspiracy, the kind of words that made lawyers sharpen their knives. Filing it meant one thing. They had the right to demand records. All of them. Weeks later, the boxes arrived at Patricia's office. 12 bankers' boxes stuffed with HOA minutes, budgets, emails, and financial ledgers. A mountain of paper meant to bury them in boredom. Karen and her counsel thought David wouldn't have the patience. But they'd never worked in a kitchen. David's whole life was patience. Brisket didn't rush, neither would he. Patricia's conference room became a war kitchen. Coffee cups, takeout boxes, evidence everywhere. David leaned into the work like he was trimming a side of beef. Hours of combing through dull letters about grass length and holiday decorations. And then, like a bone nicking the edge of a knife, something felt off. A budget line, community outreach and discretionary fund. It looked innocent. Too innocent. The amounts were neat, round numbers, $500, $1,000, $2,000. The memos vague. Consulting services, promotional printing, resident support initiative, but page after page the pattern repeated. Cash withdrawals. David's chef's eye caught the rhythm. The way a butcher spots marbling in meat. And then, gold. 2 $500 withdrawals, both labeled resident assistance, both dated 2 days before his smoker was shut down. Patricia leaned over his shoulder, eyes narrowing. That's the payoff. The money for Renshaw and Miller. The HOA paid them with neighbors' dues. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. They needed intent. That came from a hard drive in one of the boxes. Patricia's forensic tech combed through the metadata, searching the digital fingerprints of old files. He found one. A draft email, safetywarning.docx. It was Karen's infamous neighborhood-wide smear email. The one that had painted David as a shadowy threat. But the creation date told the story. It had been written 3 full days before Renshaw. And Miller even bought BBQ. David's stomach churned. She hadn't reacted to complaints. She'd written the obituary for his business before the illnesses ever happened. Patricia's face was stone. This isn't harassment anymore. This is conspiracy, fraud, premeditated. The evidence piled up, but the cracks in Karen's kingdom were showing too. One night, David ran into Roger Blackwell in the grocery store. The man looked hollow, eyes sunken, shoulders caved in like a man carrying too much weight. When Roger spotted David, he froze, tried to look away. But guilt pulled him close, his voice a whisper near the bell peppers. David! She's out of control. I told her to stop. His hands trembled. He stared at the produce instead of David's eyes. It was only supposed to be a warning, just a scare, not this. His words trailed off. Panic flared across his face, and he scurried down the aisle like a man afraid of shadows. David stood, frozen by the avocados, the confession hanging in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Patricia wasn't surprised when he told her. He's breaking, she said. People like Roger always do. He'll crack completely when the pressure spikes. And the pressure was about to spike. Patricia filed a new motion with the court. They laid out everything. The slush fund records, the cash withdrawals, the pre-written smear email. Screenshots, circled dates, highlighted amounts. It was a map of corruption. The case was no longer about barbecue. It was about power abused, trust broken, money stolen. And when the court date came, there would be no more hiding. Karen Blackwell had built her world on lies and control. But discovery had gutted it open, and the truth was starting to rot in the light. The courtroom was nothing like the cramped hearing room from weeks before. This one was cavernous, paneled in dark wood, heavy with silence. Sunlight filtered through high windows, slicing the air into golden beams that landed on polished floors. It felt less like a civic hall and more like a stage where fates were decided. David sat stiffly at the plaintiff's table, his suit crisp, his jaw locked tight. Patricia beside him radiated calm intensity. Across the aisle sat Karen Blackwell, her once immaculate presence dimmed. The power suit couldn't hide the tightness in her shoulders, the fear flickering in her eyes. She had ruled Silverstone Gardens with a gavel of gossip and bylaws. But here she was just a defendant. The jury, 9 ordinary citizens, watched everything. Their eyes scanned David, Patricia, Karen, the exhibits stacked like ammunition, on both tables. Some looked curious, some skeptical. All were waiting. Patricia's opening was surgical. She didn't roar or rant. She spoke softly, pulling the jury into David's world. She painted him as a man of process, of honor, a chef who documented every degree of his smoker, who logged every second like a surgeon. Then she pivoted, her voice sharpening. "And yet," she said, letting the silence breathe, "his reputation was dragged through the mud by lies. Lies funded by HOA money. Lies orchestrated before a single alleged illness occurred." Karen's lawyer countered with polished charm, talking of reasonable caution, of the HOA's responsibility to protect families. He tried to frame Karen as a concerned neighbor, a leader just doing her duty, but Patricia was ready. Days of testimony followed. David's logs, his vacuum-sealed food samples, the lab reports calling his process bacteriologically perfect, the sushi receipt, the cash withdrawals. Piece by piece, the fortress of truth rose higher, and then came the moment Patricia had been sharpening for weeks. The plaintiff calls Karen Blackwell to the stand. The room shifted. Karen stood, her chin high, every step to the witness stand, stiff with pride. She swore in, sat, and clasped her hands as if bracing for a storm. Patricia didn't attack. Not yet. She began with the timeline. Calm, precise, walking Karen through dates. The day the smear email was drafted, the day the cash left the HOA account, the day of the cookout, the day the complaints were filed. Each question tightened the noose. Karen's answers were clipped, evasive. "I don't recall." That's not how I'd characterize it. "It's circumstantial." Patricia's voice never rose, but it cut sharper than a blade. "So you testified you were concerned for your neighbor's well-being, correct?" Karen nodded. "Of course." "So, concerned you gave Mr. Renshaw $500 in cash?" Karen's lips tightened. "He was in financial distress. It was charity." Patricia tilted her head. "A charitable act you performed in your car? At night? In the middle of the street?" Karen's lawyer objected. Overruled. Patricia lifted a remote. "Permission to play Exhibit 22, Your Honor." The monitors flickered to life. The grainy doorbell camera footage appeared. Karen's white SUV, her arm extending, envelope in hand. Mark Renshaw taking it. The jury leaned forward, murmuring. Karen's lawyer sank into his chair. "And Susan Miller?" Patricia continued smoothly. "You were concerned for her too?" "Yes," Karen said quickly, desperate. "She was ill." Permission to play Exhibit 23. This time, the screen showed Susan Miller leaving the sushi restaurant, takeout bag in hand. Seconds later, Patricia slid an evidence bag across the table. Inside, the credit card receipt. Susan's name, the date, the raw rolls she'd eaten, the jury whispered. One woman shook her head. Karen's mask cracked. Patricia didn't let her breathe. And then, of course, there are the text messages. Exhibit 24. The screen lit up with words. "Karen, the story is food poisoning from the BBQ. Stick to it. Money on delivery of your signed complaint." Renshaw. "Got it." Miller. "When do we get paid?" The courtroom went still, Karen's face drained of color. She shot to her feet, blurting, "They begged me for help. I only—" The gavel cracked. Judge Santos's voice thundered. "Sit down, Miss Blackwell. One more outburst and you will be removed." Karen collapsed back into the chair, trembling. The jury stared, eyes wide, the evidence still glowing on the screen like fire. For the first time since this began, David saw it. The Queen of Silverstone Gardens was cornered. And Patricia was just getting started. The courtroom had gone silent, the kind of silence that rang in the ears. Karen sat stiff in the witness box, her face pale, her hands twisting in her lap. On the screen behind her, her own words glared in digital black and white. Stick to it. Money on delivery. It was the skeleton of the conspiracy, stripped bare. Patricia let the silence linger. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. The evidence was doing the work for her. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm, almost gentle. So, Ms. Blackwell, this was charity? Scripted text messages? Envelopes of cash? Smear campaigns written days before the supposed incident? This is what charity looks like to you. Karen's mouth opened, then shut again. No words came out. The jury stared, waiting, but there was nothing left to hear. Patricia turned back to the judge. Your Honor, the facts are clear. This was no neighborhood concern. This was a coordinated attack. Fraud, defamation, conspiracy. My client's reputation was dragged through the mud, his livelihood nearly destroyed, all because Ms. Blackwell didn't like the smell of hickory smoke. Karen's lawyer stood, trying to salvage the wreckage. He muttered about circumstantial evidence, about misinterpretations, about well-meaning concern. But his voice lacked conviction. The jury had seen too much. Judge Santos looked down at the file before her, her expression unreadable. Then she raised her eyes to the courtroom. Her voice when she spoke was as sharp as breaking ice. In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, this court finds there is no material issue of fact for the jury to consider. A directed verdict is appropriate. The room seemed to freeze. A directed verdict. So rare. So final. It meant the judge herself had decided. She turned her gaze directly on Karen. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. David Garrett. On all counts. Fraud, defamation, civil conspiracy. David's breath caught. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Judge Santos continued, her words falling like hammer blows. The HOA's insurance will pay restitution for Mr. Garrett's financial losses. Ms. Blackwell will personally pay punitive damages for her malicious conduct, as well as all legal fees incurred by the plaintiff. Furthermore, the HOA's bylaws, as manipulated and abused in this case, are hereby struck down. Karen's face drained of color, her lawyer sinking lower in his chair. But the judge wasn't finished. Her eyes locked on Karen, cold and unwavering. And finally, as a condition of this judgment, Ms. Blackwell will issue a full public retraction and apology. She will deliver it at the next Homeowners Association meeting, in her own voice, acknowledging the fabrication of claims, the misuse of HOA funds, and the malicious targeting of Mr. Garrett. This court will provide the text. She will read it, word for word. The gavel cracked like thunder. It was over. David sat frozen, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had fought for every inch, endured every smear, every whisper, every sleepless night staring at that red sticker on his smoker. And now, finally, his name was cleared, his reputation restored. Patricia leaned back in her chair, a slow smile breaking across her face. She didn't celebrate with words. She didn't need to. The nod she gave him was enough. They had done it. Across the aisle, Karen sat rigid, trembling, her entire kingdom collapsing in a single afternoon. She had spent months painting David as poison. Now, stripped of power and pride, she was the one branded by the truth. David stood slowly, every movement heavy with the weight of victory. The jury didn't look at him with suspicion anymore. They looked at him with respect, with something closer to admiration. For the first time since the red sticker had scarred the beast, David Garrett could breathe. But he knew one thing. The fight wasn't truly finished until the neighborhood itself heard her admit it. Until the woman who had poisoned his reputation was forced to swallow her own lies in front of everyone. That moment was coming, and David would be there to see it. The air in the community clubhouse felt different that morning. Heavy, expectant. Silverstone Gardens had gathered in full, rows of folding chairs filled with neighbors who had once whispered behind blinds, who had once crossed the street to avoid David. Now they sat shoulder to shoulder, waiting for the spectacle no one thought they'd ever see. Karen Blackwell walked to the podium like a ghost wearing a white suit. Her platinum hair had lost its shine, her shoulders sagged. Roger trailed behind her, eyes fixed on the floor, his hands wringing as if he could somehow vanish into the cracks. The gavel cracked, and the emergency HOA meeting began. The microphone popped once. Then silence. Karen gripped the podium with trembling hands. She didn't look at anyone, not her neighbors, not her husband, not David, who sat in the back, arms folded, watching. In a flat, robotic voice, she began to read. She admitted to everything. The fabricated complaints, the envelopes of cash, the misuse of HOA funds, the smear campaign drafted days before the alleged illness. She admitted she had targeted David not out of concern, but out of spite, because she hated his smoker. Her voice cracked once, but she forced herself through every line of the court-written statement. When she finished, the room stayed silent. No applause, no jeers, just a suffocating stillness. Neighbors didn't need to cheer or condemn. The truth had already done its work. Karen stepped down from the podium, her heels clicking against the tile like hammers driving nails into a coffin. Roger followed, hunched and silent. Together, they walked out the clubhouse doors, their shadows shrinking in the morning sun. No one stopped them. No one said goodbye. They simply left. And just like that, the kingdom Karen had built on fear and rules was gone. Mrs. Gable, a quiet woman who had always treated David with kindness, was immediately nominated as the new HOA president. The board moved quickly, wasting no time pretending the past hadn't happened. They voted to rewrite bylaws, to strip away Karen's poison, to make rules fair again. And when Mrs. Gable turned to David and asked if he would consult on the new policies, his answer was simple. I'd be honored. But the true restoration came a week later, on a bright, cloudless Saturday. Neighbors gathered at the park, drawn not by obligation, but by something older, something stronger. The smell of smoke, hickory, oak, slow-cooked meat rendered into perfection. The beast sat polished and gleaming, a new magnetic sign on its side. David's BBQ. Good food. Good neighbors. This time, the food wasn't for sale. It was free. A gift. An offering to a neighborhood that had been broken by lies and was now healing with truth. The line was long. Loyal customers first, the ones who had defended him through the storm. Eli, the tech geek whose cameras had cracked the case, got the first plate, and David told him it was free for life. Then came the others, the doubtful ones, the ones who had whispered. Their faces carried shame, hesitation. David just smiled, serving plate after plate without judgment. The food was his handshake, his truce. Smoke curled into the air, not as defiance, not as anger, but as welcome. Children ran across the grass, sauce smeared across their faces. Neighbors who had once traded rumors now traded ribs, laughing over picnic tables. The wound that had split. Silverstone Gardens was closing, one bite at a time. Near the tree line, Patricia leaned against the trunk, plate in hand, her eyes watching the scene with quiet satisfaction. She caught David's gaze and raised her glass in a silent toast. The smile on her face said it all. We did it. David looked out across the park. He saw Doyle, the health inspector, in a t-shirt instead of a uniform, laughing with his kids as he bit into a brisket sandwich. Captain Ruiz, too, relaxed, clapping David on the shoulder with respect. Even the new HOA president, Mrs. Gable, stood in line with her plate, ribs stacked high, already talking about fair bylaws that supported, not punished, homegrown passion. David closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. The smoke didn't smell like failure anymore. It didn't smell like suspicion or humiliation. It smelled like victory. It smelled like community. The red sticker was gone. The whispers were gone. And in their place, there was something stronger than Karen Blackwell had ever been able to control. Trust. One plate at a time, David Garrett had taken back not just his name, but his neighborhood. And this time, no one could ever take it from him again.